The nights are getting colder. Already I've woken up shivering, finding it necessary to lay beneath an extra blanket if I want any rest. But after studying the scroll whose translation I just completed, I doubt I'll be getting much sleep tonight. In fact, I'd be astounded if I found anything but nightmares once my eyes finally shut. It seems the more of these I archive, the less I understand the Vault of Anubis. It's full of bizarre stories about death, and I assume it's a collection of fiction, but then again they feel so real to me, so honest, I still can't grasp what the vault's purpose is. A library, perhaps. A storeroom for old folk tales and lore. Or something much darker. At this point, it's even a mystery whether or not the stories within were recorded by the Egyptians, or another people entirely. It's impossible to say. Despite translating the language, it has not been found elsewhere in the region, and none of the tablets or scrolls provide information on their authors. At least not yet. Which brings me to the most recent translation. It is told through the eyes of the author, a first-person perspective that is haunting. It even contains their name, and yet there's no other identifying information about them. Just a name. A faceless individual whose story was recorded in the annals of a history that lay dormant until now. And sadly, we'll never know them, how long they lived, what their lineage became, if anything at all, or what they looked like. But what I can say about them is this. Their fate was one most insecure, most taunting. It mocked them day and night, creeping ever closer. And though I don't want to imagine how their story ended, I can't help but think I'll dream it through my nightmares when I fall asleep tonight. And like them, perhaps I, too, will see a face. Face. Year and era unknown. My husband died 3 years ago, yet I see him every day. In the mirror, he stares back at me with cold eyes that bear no pupils, and his face is of no color. It emerges from the glass itself like a swimmer rising from the water just before surface tension is broken, and without the slightest hint of emotion, it blankly lingers, keeping watch over me. At night, the shape of his countenance lies imprinted on the pillow next to mine, a reminder that he hasn't left this home. When I tend the garden, I'll find him in places where I'm not searching. An impression in the soil, a wisp in the sky, on the back of a scurrying reptile. He's always the color and texture of whatever he appears on, and his expression never changes. His facial muscles are at rest, his eyes are vacant, and no matter where I go, there he is. While hunting yesterday, I took pause while tracking the beast, and in my peripherals I saw him, my husband's face poking out from every tree, aimed in my direction like a tired mob pointing a disinterested finger at the person they'd like to watch die. He blended with the bark as if carved out from it, and as if I disturbed him, he sank back into the trunks until I could see him no more. Even when I seek trade at the nearby village, my husband won't let go. He clings to the back of a stranger's head, or appears in the wall next to me as I sleep at the inn, guarding my rest behind the tawny glow of a flickering oil lamp. To where he has gone, I cannot say. The person I fell in love with is not here anymore, But in his place a haunting presence resides, and like a fungus on the edge of stagnant swamp water, it grows, seeping into my routine, my labor, and my dreams. It is toxic like gaseous fumes from the interior of a sulfur mine. It burdens me until I break, until I'm screaming at the hollow face and throwing household items in its direction. All I want is to be released, but it just holds tighter with each passing day, and I'm getting sicker. I'm getting weaker. It has to have been a decade since the event occurred, but I think I know when all this began, and it was while my husband, Gan, was still alive. We were in search of a particular herb in the sweltering forests of Arunba, where the air is thick and humid, and every tree is caked in a swampy brine. Traversing the mire requires knowledge of the trails that cut through shallow portions of the undersoak, all of them fanning out through the woodland like an above-ground root system, and as for my husband and I, we prowled these lands together for decades until our final years approached, so a swift and agile journey through the ooze came as second nature, too easy to not end in success. But it was a mistake to make that assumption. We didn't find the herb, but we stumbled upon a shrine tucked away and tilted, partially swallowed by the hungry waters. It radiated something, a quiet, natural hymn. The trees grew toward it, twisting in its direction so tightly that they engulfed the structure like a protective cage. In the middle, a statue leaned, covered in centuries of filth and cracked like a pot on the verge of shattering. It had no face, just a smooth surface upon its featureless head, and its robe flowed, curving like an elegant blanket. Looking back, I believe this was where it all began, and where, if time could be unfurled and later mended, I would stitch over it to add a different pattern, a more desirable sequence of events. At first, we thought little of the statue. We believed it was a relic abandoned by a nomadic settlement, or left behind by a rot that did not recover from its famine or predatory losses. Ages long ago had thick layers of religion that many lands lack today. Naturally, we assumed this was of significance during another, distant time. The statue's hymn was like a chime resonating far away, barely perceptible to our ears. Yet we moved closer. It was my husband who placed a hand upon it, gracing the shoulder, and as the statue shifted in its tenuous placement, we noticed the vaguest shape take form on the head. Suddenly, it bore a face. The same color and texture as the stone, the face melted into existence, lingered for a while, then sank back into the rock from which it came, disappearing entirely. Then the hymn ceased, and the statue crumbled to dust. That, I understand, is when the curse fell upon us. That is when everything changed. Weeks passed by, and our lives went on. We hunted, tended our garden, and prepared for the rainy season by reinforcing the roof of our cabin. Life felt normal. It made no adjustment from the ordinary. Until the night my husband woke up from a nightmare so real, he clawed at his face and torso, trying to remove a non-existent creature that he believed clung to his body and sequestered itself in his brain. He would sweat profusely and shamble in circles, mumbling to himself as the night waned. I could not calm or stop him, and for months this carried on, a constant affliction. Very few moments of peace found him, and he never spoke of the dream itself. However, there was one rare occasion where he let details slip, partially, that is. "The forest," he told me. "It's not what you think. I've seen what's really there." After that, his voice faded to a mumble, and he refused to tell me more. I tried to piece together bits of his rambling over the coming months, but it was nonsensical, and paranoia grew alongside his nights of terror and sleeplessness. In time, he began speaking a different language, then started digging a hole in the garden, one large enough to hold a body. He would sleep in the hole from time to time, lying with his arms straight at his side and his feet placed together. Sometimes he'd even lay there with his eyes open, staring aimlessly at the sky. During these days, I hunted food for us and tended the garden. I fetched water from the stream. My greatest hope was that Gan would recover, that he would heal and return to his senses. However, that never came to fruition. Instead, I sent a letter to Riverkeep, asking for the help of an alchemist in hopes that we might be able to find a cure. And some time later, in the heart of the rainy season, a stranger knocked on my door during the most cruel storm. The man wore a cloak that shielded his face from his eyes, and he had no mount, a fact which puzzled me at the time, since Riverkeep was a 3 days' ride if one knew the forests. His clothing dripped, and he reeked of a swamp, like fungus that clung to the soaked edges of grandfather tree roots. But the most curious thing about him was his voice. He didn't sound typical of someone educated in alchemical studies, but rather his voice came across as raw, like his throat was burning and his lungs were full of smoke. And after his greeting, he asked to see Gan by name, which I had not given in person or in the letter. Still, I assumed he procured the information from someone in the village. His own name was something I never learned, and rightly so. I don't believe he had one. The man's treatment of my husband was likewise atypical, since before any examination occurred, a pasty white substance, a medicine, he said, was provided, one that had been prepared beforehand and served from a rolled leaf. Gan was fed the paste, then given a tonic to help him rest, which put him into a deep slumber from which he could not be woken. "I extend to you my thanks," the man told me. "Farewell." He left me without an explanation or further treatment, leaving my husband and I to our own devices as the storm threw sheets of rain upon our roof with escalating intensity. The thunder did not let up until morning, and all through the night I monitored Gan as he slept, drifting through the world of dreams. His mumbling came to an end, his eyes ceased moving below their lids, and his heartbeat slowed to a soothing, restful pace. For a while, I thought his trials were done. I truly believed the man had done good for my husband. That is, until I myself woke up the next morning after unintentionally giving in to the lullaby whispers of an exhausted mind and body. I awakened to an empty bed, and where my husband previously slept. An odorous powder was left behind that trailed out of the room in the shape of footprints. It was like crushed stone, and the smell reeked of decaying flesh. Naturally, I assumed Gan arose, and was in a state of recovery, but little did I know that he would never be well again. In reality, I don't know what he was at that point. He surely wasn't a man. I followed the footprints outside, then through our garden and into the woods, where I was forced to rely on scent to guide me. I called out, but received no answer. I couldn't hear him in the distance either. All I had was that putrid, rotting stench, and it became more potent the further I walked. Eventually I had gone so deep into the forest that any hope I had that Gan was recovering had vanished. I knew something was wrong. But if I understood what was coming at the time, I would have turned back and never entered the woods again, nor would I have glanced in its direction, for fear of the horrors that trapped my husband within. After tracking the odor for 2 hours, I reached the end. The shrine Gan and I had discovered months prior. It was still covered in grime and years of unkempt growth, except now, where the statue had previously crumbled before our eyes, another was set in place. I approached timidly, afraid to accept what my eyes were seeing. I could hardly breathe, stepping closer and closer to make sure I wasn't witnessing an illusion. But no matter how much I wanted to deny it, the horrific truth stood before me. Gan was in place of the statue, and he was made entirely of stone. My eyes went numb, filling with tears I had to blink away, yet they stayed focused as I began to tremble, and the shaking grew steadily more violent the longer I stared at him. His body stood straight up, feet together with his arms at his side, his head aimed toward me, unmoving as it was carved of stone, and his face, that terrified, screaming demeanor that cried out, etched into the rock, wanted so badly to move again, but couldn't. I watched as the statue of my husband remained motionless, and for the longest time I prayed it was only a dream. But that would have been a delusion for me to believe. I feared touching the statue, so I left it there. I left Gan to be swallowed by the forest and never released, and at first I regretted the decision, but now I wish I'd never gone into the forest that day. To this day, my husband lingers in these woods, skulking in the silence, watching from the shadows, hiding beneath every surface. His face never leaves me, following everywhere I go. Before Gan touched the statue, a soul, an entity, a creature was trapped in this land for thousands of years, maybe longer, only to be released by the touch of his hand. Somehow my husband took its place. Or perhaps it didn't leave, and merely chose to feed upon Gan, or make him part of itself. For what purpose I am uncertain, but even I am not brave enough to release him from this torment, for it would mean I would suffer as he now does. For that, I will never forgive myself. I'm not sure he can either. Perhaps that is why he watches me now. He might want me to join him on the other side, and to see the world as he now does. Or maybe he doesn't see the world at all. Maybe he's gone, and the face left behind is another being, mimicking his appearance. Either way, I don't plan on finding out. At the same time, I don't plan on leaving. I will stay in this place I've always known, in the village I've always lived. But I'm afraid something is going on in the places I can't see, like I've been ensnared by a predator and have yet to realize I'm caught. Something is coming. It is waiting. I can sense it in the woods at night, when I'm staring out from my cottage window, seeing faint movement obscured by the dark. I can hear it on the wind as I tend the garden, a voice calling from the forest. I can smell it in the grass and taste it in the water. Rot is creeping ever nearer to me, clawing its way to the surface like a corpse digging out from its own grave. My husband's face is everywhere now, emotionless and empty, and even as I write this, he has molded up from the desk's wood, like an impression jutting out from the mud. Is this behavior a warning? Is it meant to drive me away? Or does he long for me? Does he want to come back to his life at the cottage? I can only imagine. My mind wanders onto the man who mysteriously emerged from the storm, reeking of a mire. What did he give my husband? I also wonder where he came from, since no one in the village has seen or heard from him. I wonder if he was a man at all, or some kind of thing. A creature like no other. There are unexplainable forces on Silverwind, and behind many closed curtains lies the synthesis, waiting to peer in and taunt those who look out the window. Gan could be another of its victims. So could I, for all I know. When I sleep tonight, my husband will join me, either breathing up from the pillow next to mine or dripping from the ceiling straight above me. And when I see him, I will stare back, aimlessly, trying to make sense of who and what he has become, trying to understand what he desires. But though I may not find an answer, I will surely listen in the silence, for I am certain that one night ago I heard a voice asking a simple question, and I long to hear it again. Mona, can you see me too?